Hello and welcome to episode 270 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick in Stockholm, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz in Hamburg, dealing with Germany's legendarily bad Wi-Fi. But I have a guest with me. Who are you? What's your name?
Do I have to answer that?
You do.
This is Seth Miller.
Hey Seth, welcome back
Also
to the
in
show.
Germany. Thank you. And I have to say, we're recording this in Jason's room, and I am admiring the plethora of stripy things he has managed to collect on the way to Germany.
Yes, stripy
Sounds
things.
like
because
someone flew Condor.
I did. I flew Condor for the first time from JFK, a very early departure, like 4:30 p.m. But I was lucky enough to fly there business class, and I collected all of the stripy things from the amenity kit to the tin that you put the amenities in. I have just some other stripy things. It was actually a really, really good experience. I really enjoyed it. Frankfurt, the connection sucked as always, but that's no surprise. It's going to suck every time. My connection to Lufthansa was fine, but Seth, you had a different experience.
I am also quite jealous because Jason has amenity kits that look nice. And the amenity kit that I collected, despite flying in economy, came because my checked bag did not make it all the way to me.
Nor has it made it to you 5 days later.
I think we're on day 6 now. But yeah, we believe it's been located. It has been forwarded. It actually started moving, but it's made it to Hamburg, but still not yet to the hotel. So
all he had to do was call in a favor for a C-suite employee of the bag handling company on another continent to get that bag moving.
Piece of cake, right?
Yeah, no big deal. It's like, the industry just works. It's magic.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You don't even have to lift a finger most of the time.
Nope.
So, but yeah, we're having a great time.
Yeah.
We're
You're
here.
in Hamburg?
Our annual journey to the Aircraft Interior Expo here in Hamburg. We've seen some things. We've laughed at some things. We've cried at other things. We'll summarize it in a little bit. But Ian, what order do we want to go in?
Well, the first thing I have on my list is Maya. Tell me who or what is Maya?
Maya. Yes. So Panasonic Avionics, maker of entertainment and connectivity solutions for airplanes, and Collins Aerospace, maker of many, many other different things that go inside airplanes, but especially seats, have teamed up to introduce what they're calling a concept seat. And the Maya concept seat is, we'll say, a super premium business class.
Verging on first class, like old school first class, yeah.
Right, so it's not the fully enclosed walls or anything like that, but it is a relatively large lie flat bed. But the specific thing about it that is special from the Panasonic side is a 45-inch curved OLED screen, right? Did I get that right?
Yep. It takes up your entire field of view in that seat, which I think is novel, but also a little concerning of just everything you see in front of you is screen.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of applications for that. You can be watching your CinemaScope aspect ratio content if available, but also you can have widgets on the side of the screen that tell you where you are and how much time is left in the flight or before the meal, and you can have other stuff and this and that. It's a lot. But it's a concept. It's not a real thing right now.
They should put a flight sim in.
Actually.
Someone actually joked, they were talking about, does it take up so much space that you'd have to reduce the number of seats or raise prices or things like that? And someone joked, well, the view is good enough. We could just take out the flight deck and put an extra couple seats in up there and, maybe sell them to other people from time to time.
Yeah.
But obviously not going to happen.
It's a concept. They're shopping it around, seeing, is this something airlines are interested in? Would passengers want this? And maybe aspects of it will make it into a real world seat or a smaller version, because a 43-inch screen, it's, in my opinion, was too much, but maybe they could do 35-inch or something a little smaller. But
it was one of those sort of things, like, because you're so close to it, it was a little bit, you can't see the whole screen left to right in a single from, with your head forward. I will say there were a few other things from the seat side of it that were also interesting. It had sort of an integrated heating cooling system through like the mesh fabric of the seat. It had a headphoneless audio system, which there's a couple different versions of this out now. One is flying actually on JAL in first class.
And business.
And business on their new A350s. This is a slightly different implementation of that, but you're sitting in the seat. It sounds like you are, in a movie theater, full on everything. And I was sitting in the seat listening and could barely hear the guy doing the demo while everybody around me could not hear the movie at all.
Well, it also had haptic feedback. So you're watching a movie and it's kind of poking you and vibrating the seat around the audio in the movie, which is cool.
Yeah. And the other thing it does is it's like sort of an ergonomic adjustment or whatnot. And it's a newer version of the old Thomson Vantage inflatable cushion thing. So,
Okay.
right. So,
a la JetBlue Mint.
yeah, the original
OG Mint.
Yeah, the old JetBlue Mint had this, and they actually, I think, finally turned it off at one point because it was not great. But this version of it sort of, as you shift and adjust, it too shifts and adjusts to keep you properly supported. There's a lot of pieces of this that are very interesting, a lot of things that are very new. And new it always means different, which means weird, which means maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, and we'll have to figure it out. So, right, we fear change. But it was, for the 3 minutes, 5 minutes I sat in it, some very cool bits about it, some stuff I'm not entirely sold on. But give me 12
That's
or
the
14
idea
hours
of
and give me
the
12
idea of a concept.
give me 12 or 14 hours a glass of champagne, I might think differently.
Fair enough. Let's walk back closer to the present and talk about some advancements in accessibility on board the aircraft. This has been a theme over the past couple of years at AIX, right?
Yeah, so there's been an increasingly very welcomed, long overdue focus on accessibility. And the big headlining item last year at the show was the Delta Flight Products first domestic first class style wheelchair seat. Do they have an official name for this thing?
Air for all.
Air for all. It's a domestic first class recliner style seat that basically folds up and away. So a wheelchair user of an actual wheelchair, not like an aisle chair or some travel specific chair, can move their chair into position where the seat traditionally is, and it could be strapped down using basically hooks on seatbelts that are integrated into the floor. This year, the update to that is looks like an actual seat now. It looks like a new Delta first class seat, but also they've introduced a version of it for economy, seeing as that most passengers don't fly in premium cabins, they fly in economy. And it's very much the same concept. 2 out of 3 seats on an aircraft in a row fold away, the wheelchair is strapped down into that position, and then it's just folded back and looks like a normal, ordinary seat again.
And it's important to note that the design here is it always has to be the first row because there's generally clearance from the door around that sort of monument when you get on board, that there's space for the larger wheelchairs, the larger width wheelchair that a passenger would come on in their own. But as you go down the aisle, it is not wide enough. So one of the reasons they talked about doing this with the economy seats is low-cost carriers or Eurobiz style airlines that don't have a proper first class cabin, they still needed a way to do this. So that is part of it. They also had an accessible lavatory, which was very interesting. And I should say before we get to the lab, Collins Aerospace also had a wheelchair mount version.
2 very different approaches to the same topic.
The Collins one doesn't involve flipping the seat out of the way or anything like that, so the certification is very different. Which is to say, you don't have to recertify it, but instead they sort of take away the monument up at the front. So when you normally walk on the airplane, if you would typically see a storage closet or like the IFE control screen or something like that to your right as you walk on, that goes away and becomes a much narrower, tiny closet that has sort of a tray table and some other controls that flip out of it. But the Collins version, you don't lose a seat, but the wheelchair passenger isn't, in the normal row, they're in front of it. So win some, lose some. It's maybe a little easier to certify, but you lose some storage instead of losing a seat or having to trade a seat and certification stuff.
And at the same time, Collins and Delta Flight Products both have accessible labs, and they are also both taking very different approaches to solving that problem, where Collins basically, if you've are familiar with the Airbus cabin flex, where you have 2 labs in the back of the plane where a false wall kind of folds away and gives you a wider space. That's what Collins is kind of doing here, but the wall kind of shifts out of the way, and you
instead of pivoting out of the way, the wall slides laterally. It's also the Collins one is an in front of the rear door lavatory. It is, so it's not in. Jason's talking about the Space Flex or Space Flex V2, which is where it's in the rear galley behind the doors at the back.
The really terrible one where you could barely even recognize that it is a lavatory and not just a flight attendant jump seat.
I'm not sure that's specific or unique enough.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
Also true.
So, but the typical sort of, and the lab that's sort of just in front of the door at the behind the last row of seats thing, the idea is instead of having one on the left and one on the right, you put 2 on the left or right directly adjacent to each other, and you put seats where the other one was. So again, you don't lose seats. And basically the doors sort of are French door style where they fold in together to the middle and then they fold out. You can slide the center partition out of the way, and then a passenger and their assistant while in a aisle chair can both fit in to assist with transferring to the toilet, doing the business and whatnot. And it's spec'd per the new DOT rules to be two 95th percentile males, which is two very large people. I am 5'11", 210 these days, so I'm not small. The guy who got in there with me when we closed the doors was 6'7", probably, I don't want to guess how heavy he is, but heavier than me. And we fit.
Tell us about the Delta version, which is a very different approach.
And so the Delta version, they put it at the front of the plane, not the back.
Also a concept.
Also a
not a real
concept.
product.
Yeah, these are all concepts, some more developed than others. But the Delta concept for their accessibility lab is the lab at the front of the plane, as you know, is typically on a single aisle is to the left of the door when you walk in, so between the door and the cockpit. This would be behind the door or aft of the door, so you'd end up where the current lab is would become the storage that gets displaced, and then become part of the galley. And then this lavatory is a pretty big box, and it's, I would say, almost sort of the size, I mean, it probably is the size of the accessible labs on a wide body. So I don't know if you guys remember the old Continental 762 party lab in the middle of the cabin. It felt that big inside. It's probably not quite that big.
And that's the important part. This is for narrow body aircraft, which today, I think we can all agree that the manufacturers have gone too far in making the labs on them unusably small, even for small people on board these aircraft. They have gone too far. And for a user of these laboratories that need accessibility for either wheelchair or reduced mobility, they are unusable. So there are cases where people are flying and they, on a 6-hour flight, and they literally cannot use the laboratory because it doesn't work for them.
So the Delta one is nice. It has basically a way that the door, again, can flip open wider so the wheelchair can get in. It's got, I think, 4 different hand grab rail options. It's got a very large changing/support table that they're rating it up to 100 pounds. So it's not just for babies. They've got, everything is touchless. So flush, toilet raising and lowering, water, hand dryer, all of those things are all touchless. Very interesting concept. Has a lot of potential, I think. Again, we have to see which of these actually meets what airlines are willing to do, meets what the DOT is willing to do, and hits the right targets with the price point and whatnot, and the LOPA for the cabin. But some really good concepts, and it's, if nothing else, it is very refreshing to see airlines trying these things and actually working to develop, or vendors working to develop them. That's something that had been missing for, as Jason said, basically forever.
Also on the entertainment side, we're seeing not just airlines, but the manufacturers of the screens getting in on accessibility too, designing into the operating itself accessibility features like screen readers, larger buttons, and just making it more usable for everyone with reduced or no vision. Because for the most part, if you don't have vision, you cannot use the entertainment system at all, which isn't great, but now it's being tackled at the manufacturer level rather than the individual airline level.
And I was, to add on to that, the way that they're approaching it is, you sort of, the OS that runs these things, isn't great necessarily. I mean, it's fine, but it's to switch. One of them explained it, I think, to switch and sort of just do to translate the existing into an accessible mode would be a terrible design experience, and you wouldn't get the accessibility you wanted, and it would ruin the airline branding. So instead of going that approach, they are choosing to basically have a toggle that you just go into accessibility mode and everything changes. And so instead of trying to make the text bigger and now the button is the wrong size, you just have new buttons where the text can be the size it needs to be. So it's a very interesting approach. They've stopped trying to make the airline branding still fit and have decided to focus entirely on the accessibility.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's really refreshing to see all of these things really coming into their own now, and hopefully airlines are positive in their adoption, especially once some of these things actually start getting certified.
That's the hope.
So let's stay in the aircraft seating realm before we move on to something that I'm curious about, Jason. But tell me more about, quickly, what American Airlines is doing with their A321 XLRs.
The XLR coming soon. So there's a lot of changes happening this week at American Airlines. We'll talk about that.
We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah, but one of them is, we know the interior of American's A321 XLR being delivered at some point in the near future. But we know it will now have a true premium economy class, which is, I think, a first for a U.S. airline on internationally configured narrow body aircraft, because you do have US airlines sending narrow bodies abroad, typically the 757. Those, some of them, at least on United and most of Delta, they have business class and then they have economy with nothing in the middle. Sometimes they send domestic aircraft abroad and they sell the recliner seat as premium economy. And that's basically what they've done here. But now they have a very premium looking business class, a thing in the middle, and then economy. And it looks like there's something for everyone.
Excellent.
Other airlines, other U.S. carriers have announced this. I think this will be the first delivered, though, right?
First delivered and probably in operation, I believe.
Delta is planning it too for some of their transcon.
Yeah, it's not totally unique. We've seen ITA do this. We've seen SAS has had this for a few years, but this is on an XLR, so presumably it will fly longer and farther. So that premium economy cabin will be an added bonus. So that's nice.
Now, I have in the show notes train seats, but you're
as-
at the
as a-
Aircraft Interior Expo.
Yes, I mean, I'm looking at my hotel room window right now, and I can see two ICE trains, one moving slow and the other moving very slow because we're in Hamburg. But the seating manufacturers here, they don't just do aircraft things, they do kind of everything, but they really only show you aircraft seat here traditionally. But on the Recaro booth, who, if you've been in any higher end cars or if you bought a gaming chair recently or several other things, you are probably familiar with Recaro. But apparently, a couple years ago, they bought a Polish manufacturer of train seats and they plunked one of those down at the front of their booth. And I kind of gravitated to that and said, oh, train seats. And I'll take a seat in it. And I sat down and I kind of went thunk. And it was just incredibly uncomfortable compared to the literally everything else being shown off at the Recaro booth. And airlines and the seating manufacturers get a lot of flack for economy seats, for calling them washboards or planks of wood. And compared to the rail seat that they had on display, those are great. But we got some interesting insight from Recaro's seating CEO about why rail seats are traditionally so horrible, or they range from really, really, really bad to like mediocre. And it's really just down to the lack of competition that Deutsche Bahn doesn't have to compete with anyone for the most part, or Amtrak doesn't have to compete with anyone for the most part. But things are possibly changing.
That's half of it. The other half is they are engineered to be significantly more vandalism resistant. They don't want people to be able to walk on and slash it with a knife, for example.
Yes, typically your airline passengers are not going on board in the middle of the night drunk. I mean, maybe they are, but they're probably not going to be damaging the aircraft because that's a federal
They don't
offense
have a
for the
knife
most part.
generally.
They probably won't have a knife is where I thought you were going to go.
I mean,
Yeah, that
the
seems the
TSA
obvious
stats
choice
on
here.
catching
Hey,
things
hey,
are
hey.
not the greatest in the world. But there are reasons why they are bad. But it seems like there's a renewed focus on making them less bad. And we talk about aircraft seats, and you fly on those for, if you're flying domestically or even within Europe, you're on there for 2-3 hours, but you can be in the same seat on a Deutsche Bahn seat or in France or even in the UK for 7 hours or overnight. And you could spend far more time in a train seat than an aircraft seat on a comparable trip.
Well, I'm glad to see that things might be changing.
Yeah.
The next item on our list from AIX is a water bottle?
A water bottle. Seth, tell us about
Not the water bottle, the water bottle filler. And so
Oh,
it makes
Makes more sense now, right?
it does.
I would argue that my favorite amenity in an airport is in fact the water bottle filler.
I love a good water bottle filler.
And I was flying out of Logan this week. It wasn't working. I actually called it in, and they were like, "Oh wow, yes, we'll send someone right over."
We'll put it right at the top of the list.
See, I got to give them credit. I was talking to actual facilities management, and they've usually fixed things when I've called it in.
More airports need to attend to their water fountains that have the little status indicators for
That's
the
bright
filter,
red.
where it's like yellow or bright red. Like, how long has this been bright
Yeah.
red? There's an indicator for a reason. It should never be red.
We
Anyway,
installed this
I
a long
agree,
time
but-
ago.
Moving on. So Safran in their booth was a demonstration of a Crystal Cabin Award, I believe, finalist.
Yep.
So recognized in the industry as a pretty cool concept of a filtered water solution. So one of the challenges with drinking water on planes is the tanks get disgusting for potable water. And basically the world has said, don't drink that. And you're flying in this giant tank around, you want to be able to use it, but instead we have plastic bottles on board of water. The idea here is a combination of physical and UV filtering to make sure that the water is clean as it comes out, it's chilled, it's all of those things. And that part of it is behind the scenes, sort of embedded into the galley wall. And then the other part of it, though, it looks like just a little dispenser sitting on the wall. And so you can walk on, especially like on a long haul flight, the idea would be that passengers could walk up and refill their bottle directly. There's a version of it that's fully integrated into the galley. And so the water
Or
spigot
the lavatory,
that they have,
lavatory.
but those water spigots could have filtered water instead of the stuff that is coming out of the tap today.
The same
Interesting.
water that they put the placard in the lab saying, don't drink this water, you might die, presumably. It is the same water, but now it's filtered. And it's a nice way to reduce single-use plastics, because we're kind of getting to the limit of like how much plastic can we remove from the aircraft, and removing 178 individual bottles of water, plastic bottles of water, is probably a good thing. And it was just pretty cool, because bottle filler or a cup of water dispenser on an aircraft is not a novel thing. Older aircraft had that and still have that. There are probably 747s out there flying around that still have like a water filling station that you should not use. But now it's what's old is new again.
And then finally from Hamburg, gentlemen, tell me, what have you heard of AI this week?
Far too many things.
And remember, we are a family-friendly podcast.
Yes, but are we AI friendly?
No.
Well, we'll see at the end of the show.
There were a lot of things. There's a lot of talk AI is going to save the world. It's going to design things that we don't even know exist yet, so we don't need to worry about the fact that we don't have enough, spare land to grow corn to make SAFs and stuff like that. But putting that challenge aside, we'll say one of the things that was presented in one of the sort of seminar presentations on Monday at the show was the idea of we can use facial recognition to understand the mood of a passenger. And we've seen this before in many applications, but
That's fine. We haven't gotten to the bad bit yet.
All right.
we're going to use that to assign seats. Apparently, there's a way that you can look at someone's face, judge their mood, and decide that they need the stink shield.
Yeah. Stink shield being...
Seat 29B, if I remember correctly. This is a old, go look up stink shield. There's a stink shield letter. It's a very old AvGeeky lore.
Seat next to the lab.
Seat next to the lab.
Yeah,
But
so
it's a good story to read.
This is a terrible, terrible, terrible idea, because you're going to get someone assigned to the last row middle seat and they're going to say, what did I do? What did you interpret off my face to punish me with this seat? A terrible, terrible,
Also,
terrible idea.
most seats are assigned in advance. Like, what could my face look like to let you know that I want a window or an aisle?
And it's not even AI. Facial recognition and reading sentiment is not a new thing.
And that sounds like an easily gameable solution. If you know you're going to have your picture taken, just smile. And if you smile hard enough, do you get a first class seat?
It's the stupidest thing. The stupidest thing.
Hang on, Ian. I got a theory here.
Uh-huh.
We go Monopoly Mr. Moneybags monocle, you definitely get a first class seat.
Oh, I like it. Top hat, you get to fly the plane.
Ooh.
If you show up in a pilot's uniform, you get to fly the plane.
Yeah.
None of this makes any sense.
No, it's profoundly stupid.
Oh, and that's why it's a trade show that showcases things that could happen, not necessarily will. This takes us to the end of the list that you gave me for Hamburg. Is there anything else you guys want to hit on before we move on to what else has happened in the industry this week?
Nah, we got enough other stuff to cover, I think.
All right. Yeah, I think we do. And we'll come back to Hamburg because you had some interesting conversations at AIX, but not necessarily AIX related. Last week, we brought you the story of Singapore Airlines flight SQ321, which suffered an extreme turbulence event, shared the data that we had at the time. Today, the 29th of May, the Singapore Transport Safety Investigation Bureau released its findings in a preliminary report. And now we have some actual G-force numbers to go along with the data that we had. So the Transport Safety Investigation Bureau confirms the timing that we presented from the ADS-B data. So at 0749 UTC on the 21st of May, 2024, the aircraft encountered extreme turbulence over Myanmar at 37,000 feet. We also now know that the turbulence began with fluctuating vertical accelerations between 0.44 G and 1.57 G for about 19 seconds. And then there was an uncommanded increase in altitude where the aircraft reached 37,362 feet. And this is all data from the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. The autopilot, which was engaged at the time, pitched the aircraft back down towards the selected altitude of 37,000 feet. The pilots also observed an uncommanded increase in airspeed, which they arrested by extending the speed brakes. As they were managing the airspeed, one of the pilots called out that the fasten seatbelt sign should be turned on. That was at 074932. 6 seconds later, so the seatbelt sign had been off. 6 seconds later, at 074940, the aircraft experienced a rapid change in G as recorded vertical acceleration decreased from positive 1.35 G to negative 1.5 G within 0.6 seconds.
Wow.
The TSB says this is, quote, likely resulted in the occupants who were not belted up to become airborne.
Yeah, that was proven to be true.
And then 1 second later, the aircraft vertical acceleration changed from minus 1.5 G to positive 1.5 G. So whoever went up came back down. This occurred over 4.6 seconds and an altitude drop of 178 feet from 37,362 feet to 37,184 feet. And this is the injury sequence, basically, this 4.6 second duration, extreme rate of change.
A pair of 3G swings in 4 seconds is
dramatic,
incredible.
Yeah, that's
unfathomable. Like, there's a lot of...
Yeah, it's crazy how this must have actually come out of nowhere. If they didn't even have the seatbelt sign on, but then the crew in that initial bump had the awareness to say, hey, the seatbelt sign's not on, let's turn it on. That's pretty great. Not that it really mattered at that point because it was too late, but this all happened, I think, way faster than we probably would have thought before the report.
So the first timestamp in the preliminary report is 074921. They put the seatbelt sign on at 074932, or the pilot says to put the seatbelt sign on at 074932. And then at 074940, so 8 seconds later, that's when the huge swings in vertical gravitational force.
Maybe there's an actual use case for AI here in the aircraft where the aircraft could simply sense, hey, it's getting bumpy, I should probably turn the seatbelt on automatically instead of waiting for a pilot who may be busy otherwise to manually flip a switch.
Can we call that data analytics or machine learning and not AI, please?
Sure, whatever you want to call it. But it kind of seems like that might be a good idea.
So this is really all we get from the preliminary report, which is actually quite a bit of information. But we also have confirmation now that my rant last week was correct, because the Transportation Safety Board in Singapore says approximately 17 minutes after the turbulence event, the pilots initiated a, quote, normal controlled descent from 37,000 feet, and the aircraft reached 31,000 feet 4 minutes later.
Well, you can begin a new rant because apparently there's some articles being published in the last few hours saying that the aircraft experienced a change in gravitational forces, as if gravity changed and then made the aircraft get bumpy, which I don't think is quite how it works.
That's how we're interpreting G-force.
Yes.
It's a gravity force, Ian, don't you know?
Okay.
That's not how any of this works.
Yeah, there's the title of the podcast. That's not how any of this works. So that's what we know so far. We will keep on after this and wait for the final report, which will come out probably in about a year. There was another turbulence event on the 26th of May, so just a few days later. Qatar Flight 17 was en route from Doha to Dublin when it experienced a bout of severe turbulence over Turkey. In that, 12 people, 6 crew and 6 passengers were injured. Those people were attended to by medics on arrival in Dublin some hours later.
Wasn't one of the crew members severely injured on this flight too?
I can't recall the exact number, and I don't have it in front of me, but there were transports to the hospital.
So they just kept on going to Dublin. Like, Istanbul to Dublin is not a particularly short flight, and they just kept on going?
They flew all the way to Dublin and were met by medics in Dublin who assessed some of the passengers and crew and took a few of them to the hospital.
Okay.
That's an interesting one to me.
Don't want to second guess a flight crew.
Sure, we don't know what happened.
I'm sure they were in contact with medical professionals over MedLink or whatever, but it just seems odd.
It'll be interesting to learn more about that particular event as well. Japan Airlines is in a bit of trouble with Japanese regulators. The Japanese regulator says that multiple breaches of regulation have shown a distinct lack of safety awareness at the carrier. And this is on top of the fatal accident involving a Japan Airlines A350 at the beginning of the year. That obviously tops the list. But the JCAB also points out a number of runway incursions, including when a JAL aircraft crossed the runway at SeaTac. There was another one where a JAL flight entered a different taxiway while another aircraft was on final approach. There was one where it passed the stop line. And there was also a alcohol-related incident in which Japan Airlines had to cancel a flight from Dallas after a pilot, quote, behaved in an inappropriate manner because of excessive drinking 2 days prior.
Huh. Okay.
Wonder if that means he was arrested.
Yeah, 2 days prior. That's a long time before a flight.
Yeah.
Was he arrested and was unavailable? You'd think the hangover would clear up in 2 days, but if it's a behavioral thing and there was a police incident, maybe not.
I don't know. So this was all part of an administrative warning due to a series of safety incidents. So the JCAB saying, hey, Joe, you need to...
Sounds...
I said, can JAL and United form a new alliance?
Yeah, it sounds equivalent to what the FAA said to United, which is apparently still going on. No one's really for sure at this point, but it sounds like JAL and United should have a meeting and discuss, how did we get here? And how do we...
Boeing, though.
Ooh, yeah. What's next?
Let's stay in Dallas and talk once again about American Airlines. This time, not about seats, but who's no longer sitting in a particular seat. Because American's chief commercial officer, Vasu Raja, is out after the airline flatly saying last week he's not out. Well, now he is.
Yes, there were some very prominent rumors saying he was taking sabbatical or he was leaving, and then American was very insistent on saying, no, he's just working remotely. It's fine, he'll be back soon. And then suddenly, last night, or during the day, U.S. time, American put out a very hasty, not hasty, but very short press release saying, he's out, someone's replacing him. You know that line from The Simpsons where Milhouse's father says, that's it, after all these years, thank you, goodbye. And then the boss says, I don't recall saying thank you. They didn't even thank him or wish him well or anything. Goodbye.
The statement was so short that I can just read it right now. American Airlines Group today announced that Vasu Raja, Executive Vice President, Chief Commercial Officer, will depart the airline in June. And then it just lists his responsibilities since 2022. And then it announces that his current responsibilities will hand over to Stephen Johnson, Vice Chair and Chief Strategy Officer, effective immediately.
So I would say there's two things. One, he's technically still employed, but has no responsibilities. So, right, this is everything has been turned off, but we haven't fired you yet because I'm sure there's some rule about how much warning you're supposed to get. That is bad. Also, we'll be departing the company. That is not a voluntary thing.
So not only is he is being fired, and in the interim, until they can, I guess, legally,
he's got 3 days.
He's being placed in the basement, away from anything where he can do any damage.
I imagine he's just told to stay home or wherever he was on sabbatical. But anyway, it's bad news. Also, accompanying the statement was an updated financial guidance.
It's bad.
Basically, revenue wasn't going to be great for Q2, but it's now going to be, I think, TRASM, total RASM, is going to be down 4% more than they thought it was going to be, 2 to 4% worse than they were expecting. And costs are going down too, but not enough. And so margins are down. It's
This isn't a business-focused podcast, but basically he's made some very questionable decisions about the course and the strategic alignment of the airline, most recently saying that if you do not book through channels that we approve of that partner with us, you will not be awarded AA Advantage miles. Really short notice to the industry to have that happen. People were not happy about it. It
delayed the implementation a little, but
a little bit, but not by much. American was losing customers and people were booking elsewhere because they don't want to put up with that hassle.
And I would argue it's not just the personal travel that Jason's alluding to, but they gutted their global sales business travel agency approach, basically demanding that everybody work directly with them and not through third parties, because arguably that's cost savings. And beyond the cost savings, in theory, you can sell better to those passengers because you have the ability to do all of the sort of NDC options of selling extra seats, selling bundles, all that stuff more.
Which is important and needs to happen.
It needs to happen, but the industry has not moved fast enough to get there through the.
He tried to accelerate it.
He tried to force.
And it was an unforced error.
He tried to push a square peg into a round hole there.
Yeah, well, you have to admire that because otherwise maybe the industry never gets to that point. But it seems like it will at some point, but you can't punish your customers to get to that point. That's not, they were using the stick approach, not the carrot, because the carrot hasn't worked in the past, but the stick was too big and they were hitting passengers too hard with that stick. So he was shown the door.
Yeah. So we'll see who takes over next. Stephen Johnson's stepping into the role in an interim basis, and he will help lead the search for a new chief commercial officer. So we'll see who gets that job. Some things to finalize this particular episode of the podcast. The C919 will make its first commercial flight outside mainland China. China Eastern sending a charter flight from Hong Kong to Shanghai. So the first time the aircraft will make money outside of mainland China.
Were the prior Hong Kong flights charter/tourist? Tours?
No, those were non-commercial. Those were as part of the
proving runs.
Hey, look at my new airplane tour. And then finally, I thought this was interesting. And then you guys made it even more interesting because of who you talked to. So Egypt Air in its financial filing.
I was wondering where you were going with that because we're not interesting people. So
No, you're certainly not. Egypt Air ditched the A320 because the engines didn't work. That's not really news, but we now have official confirmation. Those engines were recently serviced and they've sold the entire fleet to Lesser Azor and they'll move on. But Jason and Seth, you had a conversation with Air Baltic CEO Martin Gauss this week, and he had some things to say about the A220 and its engine situation.
Yeah, just to clarify, we think you may have said A320. It's, of course, the A220.
Oh, 220. My apologies if I said A320.
The 320 is also having issues, which Martin Gauss actually tells us is not as bad on the A220. It's much worse on the 320. But in an interview that Seth had arranged, I had asked at the end of our time, how's the situation going with Pratt on the A220s? And his response was just, oof.
I mean, that's about as good of a response.
He could have said much worse things.
He could have said much worse things.
He did say it is improving, it is getting better, but it is going to get worse again before it gets better due to just the dynamics of the industry, ramping up for the summer schedule, not having enough engines on wing. It's taking too long. They're a small airline, which we know, so there's a very big company above them dangling these engines, and they're a small airline. It's tricky, but this is clearly not a situation that's getting resolved or better anytime soon. I mean, when the CEO comment is literally oof, and it's on the record, you know it's a problem.
And I would say his comment was, Pratt is what it is, but he actually referenced them as a large American military industrial complex company that happens to make engines, which not wrong, but he certainly has a view of that there in a way that was particularly interesting. But yeah, he went on a little bit about how he felt that the massive company was taking advantage of how small they are and not being willing to pay compensation at the levels that were implied and things like that. So no idea what the actual outcome of that will be.
This is interesting because this kind of jives with what we've heard from other folks that have been familiar with negotiations around engine compensation and getting the aircraft fixed. Because what we've talked about previously, and I think this was a couple episodes ago now, where companies that are tiny, that only have a few Pratt-powered aircraft, and without them, they can't run their airline. Those are getting fixed. And the airlines that have a ton of Pratt engines that are huge airlines and long-time customers that are going to buy 100 or more planes, those are getting fixed. But the airlines that are in the middle, like Air Baltic or Air New Zealand, that, they can scrape by without those particular aircraft, and maybe they can go a little longer, they're not seeing the kind of help that they feel they deserve.
Yeah, and interestingly, Air Baltic will get to that point where they are that big airline that cannot be ignored. They are not quite there now, but they have orders, at least now, for 100.
They'll be at 100 aircraft. They're at 50 by the end of this year, and they'll be at 100 by 2029, end of the year, is the plan, assuming Airbus keeps delivering them.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's basically a plane a month for a long time. That's not quite the pacing they're going to deliver. The next 2 years are a little slower, but it's a lot.
I think the pace is a little slower for every airline at the moment. But interesting to see what happens when they do have that many aircraft. Gentlemen, enjoy Hamburg for the rest of the week. You're off tomorrow, I believe?
Friday.
We got one more day of the show. And
Excellent.
then maybe Seth will be reunited with his bag by the end
With his bag by then.
We'll go celebrate with a drink and take the bag out, I guess, and come to dinner.
You're not going to take me to a bar and spill beer all over my suitcase with the clothes that I've been waiting a week for.
It'll be, they're inside the bag. It's fine. It'll be
Well,
fine.
I wish you both the best of luck with that. Seth, I hope you get your bag back sooner rather than later. And I'm headed back from Stockholm to Chicago tomorrow. So by the time the podcast comes out, I will be home, and we'll talk more about that next week's episode. Seth Miller, thank you so much. Seth's work can be found across the wide internet, but mostly at paxx.aero. So go check that out. For Jason and myself, this has been episode 270 of AvTalk. Thank you all so very much for listening.
Take care.
Thanks for listening.